What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again once again, and today we are talking about Season of the Haunted and my first impressions. For those of you who don't want any spoilers, the TLDR is, Season of the Haunted returns to the concept and ideas first introduced in Shadowkeep. The moon is haunted, and suddenly, once again, it's our problem. Well, not just our problem, because everybody has their demons, and we have to help them work through them, while uncovering what Callus wants. With the pyramid ship on the moon. The two story missions available, the intro and the episodic story mission, that are currently available, have a very Dead Man's Tale exotic mission feel to them, with the navigation of spooky, claustrophobic spaces in the underbelly of the Leviathan, which has now become a sort of patrol zone. These two missions are well done, they're atmospheric, and they set up an interesting story. The second mission has a lot of spoilers, so I won't really get into it, but what I will say is enemies returned as nightmares, and spaces from the Leviathan raid are used really well. Both of these missions were highly enjoyable from both a gameplay and narrative perspective. As from loot to the new Horde mode, not Horde mode, your mileage will vary wildly, based on how much you can stomach reissued loot and Escalation Protocol 2.0. Solar 3.0 is new. And at the time of recording, it's unclear whether it's bad, or if the community just doesn't understand it, or if something's broken. Also, I don't know if this is an oversight or working as intended, but there is a laundry list of exotics Solar 3.0 doesn't seem to be working with. This is something I plan to revisit later, once the community has a better understanding of how Solar 3.0 works. We won't be talking about the dungeon in this video because it's sold separately and I don't want to give people the impression that it's part of the DLC. So, opinions. The narrative aspects of the DLC are by far its strongest. Everything else from reissued weapons, which, to be clear, I'm not necessarily mad about, because they're changed enough to justify the reissue. They now have origin perks and they're craftable. But again, your mileage may vary based on what you already have and how enticing these weapons are to grind out. That's going to be it for the spoiler-free section of the video, so leave now or forever hold your peace. Remember to like, but only if you did, subscribe for more, feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous, but above all else, stay frosty. So, everybody has their demons. For Crow, it's Uldren. For Keitel, it's Gull. For Zavala, it's his dead wife. For me, it's the mind-numbing grind and spending hour upon 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 maddening hour trying to unlock 5 deep-sighted Ostringers that are needed to craft it. Yay! I've only got 3. Our story begins with the Vanguard launching the USS Ragnarok at the moon. Wait a minute, hold on, wrong franchise. Our story starts with the Vanguard launching the USS The Helm at the moon, so we can investigate the Leviathan. The Leviathan that suddenly appeared out of nowhere and started interacting with the pyramid ship in the moon's juicy, crusty, crunchety little core. We land on the Leviathan to find out that it has been taken over by the Flood. I wish that was a joke. Yeah, come to find out that the Darkness House plant isn't actually a plant, but a fungus, and it has a galaxy-spanning consciousness. You know, like the Flood. I'm not even mad that Bungie's basically using the Flood. When was the last time the Flood showed up in the story of a mainline Halo game? 2007. And no, Halo Wars and the Halo phone games do not count. I said mainline. So good on Bungie for bringing the Flood back before 343. I mean, I'm only kinda joking here. It's a good aesthetic and there's just something horrific about a galaxy-spanning consciousness that's also fungal in nature. I don't know, I like it. Yes, it's the Flood, like for all intents and purposes, but also I like it. Like I said earlier in the spoiler-free section of the video, this mission is very reminiscent of the Dead Man's Tale exotic mission. It's claustrophobic, it has a lot of atmosphere. It definitely tries to play on the eldritch horror of what's going on in the Destiny universe right now, while presenting the setup for an interesting story about dealing with one's inner demons and loss. A story that seems to be a little bit of a redo for Shadowkeep. The problem with Shadowkeep was, not only was it just bad, it really did hinge on you caring a lot about Eris Morn and her plotline, all while being blueballed about the Hive and Darkness ships. Shadowkeep was really anticlimactic. This seems to be a do-over, focusing more on the psychological horror nature of these manifestations of people's nightmares. In Season of the Hunt, we have 3 NPCs being exposed to these nightmares for the first time. Crow, who's become the most developed character in the entirety of the franchise, and the power couple that is Keitel and Zavala. While we've not really dived into Keitel and Zavala's stories at the time of recording, Zavala's story will deal with his dead wife. I talk about that in my trailer breakdown. And Keitel has Gaul. And there's a lot that can be done there because Keitel and Gaul were part of the Midnight Coup that basically led us to where we're at right now. I find that the nightmares are a fantastic way to dive into these characters' backstories and psychology, but I do feel like Crow has and will continue to steal the show. Crow is the main character of Destiny. The player character? Well, we just get to kill things and watch everybody else deal with character development, but hey, fucking details. Make of that what you will. The story shows a great premise so far. It has hooks, but it all comes down to execution. Will they stick the landing? And if I might digress for a moment, as I am oft wont to do, I couldn't help but notice that this DLC seems to be extremely reminiscent of Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker, at least thematically. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one ripoff, but what I will say is, if Destiny goes down the same rabbit hole, in terms of themes and ideas it's trying to explore, it could find itself on the tone-deaf side of its own message. Dealing with loss and tragedy and your inner demons by shooting them in the head probably isn't the best message you want to boil down to a traditionally 5 to 6 weeks episodic story arc. With Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, that story was the culmination of nearly a decade of storytelling. Hundreds, if not thousands of hours of plot and lore. So I could see Destiny's iteration or attempt to do that fall flat. Fall flat because the only character in Destiny that's actually a character is Crow. And Crow is divisive at best within the fandom. People either really like Crow or they want to take him out behind the tower and shoot him. This is further compounded by Crow being the first character whose demons we try to exorcise in another standout mission from a gameplay and narrative standpoint. I'm not saying it's a bad choice to start with Crow. I like Crow, but maybe they should have delved into somebody's history first. Save Crow for later. I don't know, I feel like this is another one of those your mileage may vary based on how invested in Crow you are, sort of things. As negative as I'm sure someone will twist that to be, I've enjoyed what I've played so far. This season hits the ground running with one of the strongest narratives a Destiny season has ever started with, and some of the best story missions we've ever seen in a season. Where Season of the Hunt might fall apart for people is, well, everything that's not the story. It's going to depend on how invested are you in reissued weapons. How invested are you in another Horde mode, not Horde mode, Horde mode. The big draw of the season, of course, outside of the story, is the loot. Now, I'm inclined to be less angry than I've seen other people when it comes to the reissuing of weapons this season. Not only do they have origin perks, but they're part of the crafting system. On that same note, I do get why people are kinda sick and tired of this. I am absolutely done seeing the argument,
"But Joker! First you bitch that they sunset the weapons, now you're bitching that you have them back!"
Actually, no, I don't. I have to grind them out again. A switch didn't flip and I can suddenly take my Austringer from my vault and use it again in high-end PvE and PvP content. No, what Bungie has done is padded out playtime by going, if you want Austringer back, you gotta play the game again. You've gotta grind it out again. Now, in my opinion, this is alleviated by the fact that it is a craftable weapon, and it has an origin perk. To people upset about the reissuing of these weapons, this really isn't the same thing as sunsetting Gnawing Hunger and then bringing back Gnawing Hunger in the same DLC, or the next one. However that happened. So while I think it's absolutely ridiculous to dismiss people being upset about reissued weapons, I do think that these weapons are kind of the exception because they're at least changed in very fundamental ways and integrated into new systems. But also, I completely understand if you don't care about them. This is very much, as I keep saying throughout the video, a mileage may vary thing. I think the biggest issue that people are going to find with Season of the Haunted is really demonstrated through the grinding of loot. Because the rewards are craftable, as you're playing the game and you're unlocking them, none of the rewards you get matter. It doesn't matter if you get a God-rolled Austringer, it's not craftable, and it doesn't have enhanced perks. So now you have this loot grind that really doesn't incentivize players playing a lot, but more playing when they're supposed to. What do I mean? Well, on one hand, I could spend 50 hours beating my head against a wall trying to get 5 deep sight Austringers. On the other, I could consume the content episodically, and over the course of a few weeks, level up the Crown of Sorrow as you're supposed to, and just gain the ability to purchase deep sight resonant Austringers, or turn in engrams for Austringers that could potentially drop with deep sight. This creates a scenario where it's actually more lucrative not to play the game, because you're not burning yourself out with the monotony of the grind. And trust me, I've been on that 5 deep sight resonant Austringer grind. I have 3. And getting those 3 was the most mind-numbing experience I think I've ever had in Destiny. And that is kind of the problem with the seasonal model in general. The way that content is drip-fed through a season plays more into the idea of players playing once a week and not once a day. And when that drip feed of content is done, this leads to the second half of the season feeling quite barren because there was nothing released during the season for players to really dig their teeth into. All in all, Season 17 is great if you're just here for the story, but falls apart when it comes to longevity if you really don't care about a horde mode, not horde mode that we've already played 100 times. Or a very deterministic loot grind that ultimately ends in you getting craftable versions of the weapons if you just wait a couple of weeks. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did, subscribe for more, feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous, and above all else, stay frosty.